Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Today, a review of a film by Werner Herzog, Little Dieter Needs to Fly. There is a recurring theme in my life, a recurring, not necessarily point of interest, but just critical view associated with the Vietnam conflict, but also associated with people that I've met, people I've had the privilege to talk with, who have been very candid associated with their experiences through the conflict. And one of these people who also potentially still, maybe, as a Short Funk listener, was actually captured in Vietnam. And I've talked to him very sparingly associated with his experiences through that. I find the whole notion that there are people that walk amongst us that have experienced this kind of deprivation and psychology and captivity and all these really very bizarre and curious things. I mean, really medieval experiences walk amongst us. They're part of humanity that we still have access to. And through the nature of conflicts and the way in which nation-states continue to engage in conflicts, the likelihood is that these experiences will traverse many generations. In the US in particular, the whole Vietnam War has been progressively rewritten through censorship, primarily military censorship. And the ability to have people that talk about their experiences being captured in Vietnam is really fascinating and I think quite important. In terms of Little Dieter Needs to Fly, this documentary was made in the mid to late 1990s, so a lot of this revisionist Vietnam history wasn't really in full effect then. There was still a relatively coherent narrative associated with the US losing the war in Vietnam and the things that went around that. And if you fast forward to the present day, it's a luxury in a very curious sense that there are these kind of oral video histories that are still available, because my perspective is the editorial rewrite of the Vietnam War is a really astonishing phenomena which I have observed through my lifetime. And it's one of these things where there are some things in this world where if you don't pay attention, you just don't recognize these things. And one of the things I like to do actually is pay attention here. So Little Dieter Needs to Fly provides an attention to detail associated with the conflict. Now, Dieter himself didn't feel any qualms associated with what he was doing there. He was an active participant. He had a military history. He'd come from Germany. He'd seen the depravity at the end of the Second World War. And that is an interesting additional kind of juxtaposition to his experience. But also the nature of his survival and his escape and all these kind of things is just really fascinating to listen to. And of course you have Werner Herzog, who has a particular style which injects him in some regard as a narrator, but also he has rather curious timing, he has rather curious observations, and the combination of Dieter as the primary narrator and Werner Herzog as the additional narrator, very, very interesting. And sometimes I'll say Werner and sometimes I'll say Werner. So please be assured that there's very little consciousness providing you this audio. So I would certainly recommend Little Dieter Needs to Fly for people who are interested in still getting a grittiness associated with the Vietnam War and the early part of the Vietnam War, moreover, which is rarely talked about. If you look at, the History Channel's History of Vietnam or any of the modern media is presented associated with the Vietnam War, you'll start to see a very curious narrative appear. But you'll need to pay attention. And it's important to have these kind of references, these kind of historical points to go back to and say, well, actually, if you look at this, recorded before the rewrite of the Vietnam War, you will see these aspects. Now it appears almost impossible for people to talk candidly associated with their particular experiences in Vietnam if it doesn't directly agree with the new narrative which is being presented. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.